Are you waiting for democracy from the top down to find you? Did you know that the Great Black Depression of 2008 left African Americans at 31% of a loss of their wealth, while whites sustained 11%? Do you see the increase of people of color's acquisition of college degrees as a signal of arrival to the aspiration that all men are created equal? Do you? Have you ever heard of the value gap? Not before reading this book, I did. Then let's talk right quick about Eddie Gaude's book, Democracy in Black. The notion of the value gap was interwoven throughout the book alongside the idea of disremembering, which is actively forgetting. Not remembering the formidable acts of people of color, particularly blacks, causes the value gap to persist and widen as long as the impact is not brought to the fore of conversations. Thus, honoring the 4th of July and President's Day, which includes heroic acts of patriarchy towards America's union, leads to disremembering of truth surrounding the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Trail of Tears, and separate but equal, let alone slavery. Slavery! Disremembering means no one can be held accountable, but the victims can be blamed. As an educator, I begin to see that education and textbooks are aligned to this political agenda of disremembering. In other words, we ignore the truth of influencing events and values to avoid confronting the truth. Racial habits in this country are connected with what some refer to as past behavior. Many have this disposition that racism died with those who lived and made decisions prior to the Civil Rights Movement. So thus, it's no longer impacting us. But with the average age of members of Congress in the Senate being 60, many of these representatives were taught and were raised in segregated societies and segregated schools. Even with the black president, there is an illusion of post-racial society as he refers to the vile killing of Trayvon Martin as a tragedy. With no mention of race or racism, there is no top-down accountability for the ways in which racism and race has systemically impacted the lives of black and brown folks in this country. Let that sink in. So Eddie Gaude goes on to examine the establishments of blackness, which strips the individual of their culture, being South African, Caribbean, Haitian, Jamaican, Nigerian, etc. In America, you are simply black, coerced into succumbing to the opposite of whiteness, which is the equivalent of opportunity hoarding, access, and privilege in America. Black institutions such as churches, fraternities, sororities, schools, and businesses, as a result, were established to fulfill the benefits of citizenship and affirm basic humanity. That said, these institutions gave and still gives blacks a space and courage to resist. Beyond those spaces, Eddie Gaude explains and acknowledges the courage of traditional black liberalists such as John Lewis, Jesse Jackson, and Maxine Waters. In their own ways, they have shamelessly antagonized white supremacy, but there are those who believe that the government cannot close the value gap. In alignment with Between the Loves uplift suasion theory, they believe that black resilience is more important than anti-racist policy. We should instead uplift ourselves by our bootstraps. But even this idea of self-uplift is inextricably connected to disremembering. It suggests this: no matter what happened or no matter who did it, forget it and uplift yourself. Disremembering benefits the beneficiaries of the value gap. So the question is, what did I learn from reading this book? I learned that sometimes leaders stand in the way of progress, and the people have to be committed to evolving visions, even if it means surpassing the willingness and criticism of traditional leaders. In Democracy in Black, Eddie Gaude refers to a series of events with Al Sharpton that proved this lesson for me to deem it true. But I don't want to spoil the tea here. Go read it for yourself. So what are the implications? Now what? Number one, according to John Dewey, democracy must be continually explored afresh. At this point, democracy has to be redefined, and we who want to see change must pay the cost of advocacy on ballots and in the streets, because the ballot alone just ain't enough. Number two, We must change the way we see blacks. Conservatives and liberals alike see blacks as failures and statistics. We've got to be careful not to place blacks in categories of thugs, welfare queens, criminals, lazy, and unteachable. Just in case you're getting this mistaken, the onus is emphatically on whites to resist the urge to impress the images of black people through single narratives. According to a recent study, researchers found that the social circle of 75% of white people are all white. But why am I sharing this? People, we must all be willing to dismantle our judgments and biases to build authentic relationships beyond fear. Beyond fear. Number 3, but we've got to see whites differently too. The more we believe that whites matter more than others, we will begin to remain as a subordinate in the role of second-class citizens, binding ourselves and imprisoning our own humanity. Number 4, we need to atone ourselves from American values. When the wall of an apartment gets more justice than a black woman, we got a problem. When we build dog parks in downtown areas while gentrifying black communities, it's time to see some change. When capitalism in the form of money, greed, and narcissism is the template for success, we've arrived in some deep... Because materialistic goods and money will always be worth more than the hands of those who were oppressed. Eddie Gaude said it best. He said, "On its face, this seems to be a laudable goal, to be treated as an American, to be judged by the content of one's character alone. This is the hope of colorblindness. But this state of affairs requires that we leave our identification as Negroes at the doorstep." I'm going to skip down some. He says that black people must lose their sense of blackness if America is to be transformed. But of course, white people get to stay white. We've spent decades in our schools teaching our youth how to disremember. The pathway to change is through the decolonization of the minds and policies that liberate. But hear me out. We cannot do that work without acknowledging the value gap. Thank you, Dr. Gaude, for reminding us that no single organization, no single set of leaders can represent our democracy. But in the words of Ella Baker, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. So far, it starts with us.